This is a random hole in a random rock behind a random elementary school in Norton, Massachusetts. The vast majority of people who drive by this school probably don't even know the rock is there. Like, it's hardly something you would ever stumble upon by accident. But despite that, if you crack open the right history book, like maybe this one from 1859 for example, then you just might learn that our boulder here isn't so random after all. In fact, this humble little stone is the centerpiece of a truly wonderful tale of New England folklore that has mostly been lost to time today. So how about you and me revive the legend? Starting with this gravestone here, sitting in a little cemetery a mile or so away from the rock. Buried under this headstone is a man named Major George Leonard, a pretty important figure in the early colonial history of Norton. See, Major Leonard here established Norton's first ironworks forge back in the late 1600s. It was one of the first major industrial projects in Norton, and its operation was successful enough that Leonard died a rich and prominent man in 1716. So rich and prominent, in fact, that some of the townsfolk in Norton weren't so sure that Leonard could have been that successful without any help. And so, they gossiped about him, and over time, a legend began to develop. A rumor that Major George Leonard had paid a pretty hefty price for his wealth. See, if you talk to some of the more imaginative folks in Norton, then they just might tell you that Major George Leonard had made a deal with the devil. That George had promised to give his body to Satan in exchange for great success and wealth. And as the story goes, the devil actually came to collect the debt in person one evening in 1716. Major Leonard had come down with a serious fever and was near death on the top floor of his mansion when the devil came a-leaping through the window. He scooped up Leonard under his arm and bounded back out into the night, disappearing into the blackness. And so, with no body to bury, Leonard's family snuck a great big wooden log into a coffin and buried that instead. They were just too embarrassed and too proud to expose the sinister origin of the newfound family fortune. It's pretty fun to think about, isn't it? That it's not actually Major Leonard buried under this headstone here, but instead a log meant to trick the rest of the Norton townsfolk. But despite the best efforts of the family, they couldn't erase all the physical evidence of George's deal with the devil. See, as Lucifer leapt out the window on that dark, dark night, he sailed above the treetops, out over the Leonard family farm, and crashed down upon a big boulder out in the woods of Norton, forever burning a great footprint into the stone. And that is supposedly what you can still see here on the rock today. According to legend, this is the footprint of the devil. But you want to hear what's really crazy about this whole thing? This isn't even the only Devil's Foot rock in New England, like not even close. In fact, I've heard similar stories about similar stones all across the region, and I've even visited a few of them too. Like, for example, how about this Devil's Foot rock over in North Kingstown, Rhode Island? To get to it, you basically just gotta charge into the woods off the side of a state highway and then start wandering around up on some rocks by the railroad tracks. But make no mistake, despite the stone's low profile nowadays, this rock was quite well known a few hundred years ago. In fact, this stone used to be enough of a landmark that old newspapers and books would use it to give directions. Like, you know how nowadays if you were telling someone how to get somewhere in your hometown, you might say something like, oh yeah, turn left at the old fire station? Well, if you were alive in North Kingstown back in 1863, then you might be telling people that old Mr. Carpenter lives by Devil's Foot Rock and expect them to know just exactly what you mean. And if you don't believe me, here's another newspaper, this time from 1917, describing the location of a car crash by saying that it was by Devil's Foot Rock. And here's another one, this time from way back in 1828, almost 200 years ago. This one is warning everybody that a huge snake den had been spotted again by Devil's Foot Rock. I just love this little line here that they used to close out the article. Perhaps a more appropriate place could not have been selected as a retreat for such a family. The origin legends behind this Devil's Foot Rock are a lot less centralized and a lot more plentiful than the Norton Stone, but they all still generally revolve around the same thing. Old Lucifer stomping a big old burning foot right here in the rock. And a lot of the stories also mention that these smaller holes were supposedly left by a devil dog that Satan had with him when he jumped off the rock. Like, I guess these are supposed to be little burning paw prints. I also found what looks like some kind of concrete building foundation out in the woods by the rock. I did some digging to see if I could figure out what this is, and my best guess is from this article from 1940. This says that two teenagers used to live by themselves out in the woods right next to the rock. I think there's probably a good chance that this is the old foundation of their cabin. I wasn't able to find any other news about any other structure next to the hole, so I'm thinking it's probably got to be this. But despite all that extra stuff, I think the coolest thing about all this is just that we got two almost identical landmarks called Devil's Foot Rock that are only a few dozen miles away from each other. Like, it just goes to show you how intuitive it was to see this kind of feature and connect it to the devil somehow. Especially when you consider just how weirdly pervasive footprints were in old New England folklore at the time too. Like while I was researching this video, I found a whole ton of different bits of folk wisdom involving the footprints of devils and witches specifically. Like for example, did you know that you can find out if someone is a witch by stepping into their footprint? Yeah, I read this in a 100-year-old book of folktales I found. According to this, if you step into a witch's footprint, then they'll whip around real quick and stare you right in the eyes. A witch can always tell when someone steps in their footprints. Or how about this? Here's an old myth I found that apparently migrated over from Italy. If you collect some dirt from a witch's footprint and then throw it over someone that the witch had cursed, then the spell will be lifted and that person will be free. And here's one last legend I found. Some old books of folk wisdom might tell you that you can drive a nail into someone's footprint in order to find out if they're a witch. If the person who had made the footprint truly was a witch, then the nail would fasten them in place wherever they are, just as if you had actually stabbed a nail into their foot. Apparently, this is especially effective if you take the nail out of a coffin of someone that you think the witch might have killed. But hey, don't forget to tie a string to the nail though, because if you need to release the witch for whatever reason, you're gonna want a good grip for pulling the nail out. But alright, enough sidetracking with weird old footprint legends. How about one more set of devil's footprints to close out the video? This time, let's head over to a waterfall in East Haddam, Connecticut. See this big pothole looking thing under the waterfall here? Science would tell you that it was formed by the water grinding away at the stone. But an old book of folktales might tell you that the devil himself once bounded his way up the rock here, leaving great big demonic footprints in his wake. I guess he was trying to cross the river one day when he accidentally dipped his tail into the water, freaked out, got all hot and angry, and jumped his way out of here. Pretty cool, right? According to some other stories I found, people also thought that these potholes would be used by witches as like cauldrons for brewing evil potions and casting horrible spells. So hey, I guess the message of this video is next time you're out in the woods and you find yourself in front of a seemingly random hole in a seemingly random rock, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody you know that the devil once stomped his way across the stone. Who knows, maybe 300 years later people will still be talking about it. Thanks for watching.